everyone. This is the second Speed Academy this year. I'm co-hosting together with Ilka, and I'm super excited about this one. First of all, because our guest Anthony is an incredible human being, and I have the honor to be working with him on a day-to-day basis. But even more so, because he is or actually one of the best data strategists I've had the honor to be working with. So I want to give you a bit of background before he dives into his presentation. He's going to present his point of view on the role of data as a force to creative betterment. I wanted to quickly introduce him to all of you because his career is quite significant. So he started as an analyst at MRI, then worked his way up to group data strategy director at Droga in New York, worked on the New York Times, the iconic Under Armour campaign, and if I remember correctly, also for Game of Thrones. I'm, by the way, the only person that has never seen Game of Thrones. Sorry for that. In February 2023, we were lucky enough to hire him as European head of data. He's now working for both offices, London and our Berlin office, for clients such as Expedia Group, Johnny Walker, Google, Novo Nordisk. And I did some digging on him, and in one of his latest interviews, he said, people care about the sausage more than the sausage making. The so what more than the what. So that's why 80% of time is for him sifting between data points to get to an interesting pattern or insight. And the remaining 20% are spent on visualizing and communicating that information in a compelling and most meaningful way. And he's an absolute ace in doing that. So I'm hoping that today we actually have the chance to give you an intel on how much value this approach of treating data as more than a measure and an afterthought, that it can actually bring so much value to stretching the role it can play in pushing brand and creative thinking, and above all. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Anthony.
Amazing. I can't tell if this is a burn or blushing, but thank you so much, Nadine, for all of that. Yeah, really excited. And I think after 10 plus years of doing this, I think, it's so exciting to just be talking about the different ways to be using data to not share, to really drive effectiveness at all parts of the process and really taking it out of this perception and pigeonhole of being at the end to measure the performance and really thinking about it as an effectiveness driver throughout. So that's sort of the intention behind the name of this session, from an afterthought to a thought starter. How can we infuse data thinking throughout the process so that we're not just thinking about effectiveness at the end and really using data to get us closer and closer to the most effective solutions and the most effective results throughout. So I think just starting off, and I sort of alluded to this, data is a really big word with many different meanings. You have quantitative data, which most people think of, but also qualitative data, the way you can code and add metadata to things, that's still data. Some data is structured, and that's what we usually use, but a lot of data is unstructured that we could be tapping into and harnessing. Attitudinal and behavioral rarely ever say the same thing. And so how do we use those and combine them to get to interesting tensions? First-party data that our clients or our teams might have versus third-party data that we buy. Big data, I remember a few years ago, was a very big topic, but also small data. Some of the best insights come from really small pools. Real-world data, now emerging conversations around synthetic data, and observed data versus inferred, thinking about models, econometric modeling and simulations and things that we can project. But when we talk about it, we always just say data. There's so much complexity and richness in the space. And as a result, our industry has really become more and more fragmented over time. You have so many different tools and providers. There's so many different ways to deploy and harness data. And so that hasn't helped. There's so many different meanings to data. And actually, when we look at the industry overall, it's become so specialized and fragmented that it's really hard to navigate and really tap into that holistic capability of data. So the goal of today, it's really not to summarize data in all its forms. I think just use that to level set. My intention really is just to discuss how we could be harnessing data more and more throughout the process to deliver both effective solutions and effective outcomes. And so the solutions piece, it's using data to empower clients and teams to make more effective decisions. It's all the day-to-day conversations that we have. How can we be using data to actually progress us forward and give us the confidence that we're making the right decisions throughout? And then I think effective outcomes, which most people are more familiar with, using data to ensure that we're achieving our objectives, optimizing our results in market, and getting to the most bang for our buck when it comes to our investments. So the way I've set this up is just really starting off with a few perceptions that exist in the marketplace. So one, I think there's a lot of thought around data as the objective truth. I've worked with a lot of data practitioners who say, well, I'm the data person, and so it's numbers, you can't argue with it, it's objective, this is what's right. And I actually think that's a really unhelpful way to think about data. I prefer to think about it as human empathy. Data is just a signal that we get and that we use to really understand people better. And I think if we stop thinking about it as this final truth and actually just think about it as understanding of people, it's equally as valuable as another perspective. And our job is to bridge it together to get to the best answer. So what I've just done here is try to outline there are lots of different data sources out there that we're probably familiar with. There's brand tracking data, business data, so on and so forth. The first thing, and there are lots of places that we can tap into this data. And the point of this slide really is to say there are free sources. It should never be a reason, well, we don't have tools. There are a ton of available sources that everyone can be tapping into. And then there are paid tools that obviously you subscribe to get. But across these different data sets, we all have access to different levels of this data. But I find the most useful thing is to really, before jumping into anything, just translating what are the numbers telling me about people. So when it's about brand tracking, that really answers the question of how do people see us? When it's business data, it's are people buying us? Are more people buying us? Are they buying us more frequently? But I love to just start with why am I looking at this? What is it telling me about people? Attitudinal data tells me what do people believe. Behavioral tells me how do they behave. Social data, what are they saying? What are they confident to say online and attach their name to? What are they not confident to say and anonymously post online? And performance data, are they engaging with us? Is what we put out there working and sort of building a relationship with them? So seems really simple, but I think it really is critical in getting from observations 10% click-through rate to actually getting to 1 in 10 people were so compelled that they wanted to learn more and go to site and dive in deeper. It just changes sort of the meaning of that. And so this is fake, but the other thing is these are all single data points about people and they tell us about them. And the truth, that objective truth we talked about, it's actually triangulating and telling a story by the patterns and connections we see between data sets. So brand tracking might tell us people are considering us more. But when we look at our business data, we might see they're not actually turning into sales in year-over-year results. And then we might look at behavioral data and say, actually in the category, more and more people are buying online. And then when we look at our performance data, we might see we're not attracting them to our site. And so suddenly I have this rich sense of what's going on with people and that the brand's working, but there's a disconnect happening and that despite e-com being really prevalent, it's not working for me and my brand specifically. And now suddenly I could hone in on a space that is both important for the brand. How do we make more of the brand? Because consideration is there, we're just not converting it. And actually the touch point where that's not, something is going awry. And I think using data in this way helps us triangulate the truth, not a single data point, but building patterns across them. So the next piece I want to talk about is a lot of people think about data as a silver bullet. What is the optimal answer? What is the right answer? Is there a better answer out there? And I've never found it useful to think that there is only one right way in. I think in my experience, there's tons of different ways that you could get to success. And I think our role as strategists is to find what's best, not just from a results perspective, but from an organizational perspective, so on and so forth. So I really, and this isn't a novel thought, I prefer to think about data as a strategic discipline. And I understand there is this deep and understandable desire for data to give us the answer, the one and almighty right answer. But I think there are a few things that keep us from being able to, for data to act that way. I think one is for data to give us the right answer requires the perfect data set. That requires money to pay for the data. It requires time to build the right models. It requires the resource to actually build the models with the right expertise. And all that time you're spending building the perfect model, you're actually foregoing valuable opportunities, right? Because you're waiting for this model to make a decision when actually there's probably enough data out there to make a decision. And so I just wanted to unpack that there is not just money costs and time costs, there's an opportunity cost in waiting for the perfect data set. I think also human behavior is complex. It always has been, and it becomes more and more complex. And so while there are great advancements in attribution and econometric modeling, and when it's possible, we should absolutely be investing in those things. We shouldn't be thinking of them as the one model that's going to explain all of human behavior and all of its complexity. It's one input. It is empathy as well. It's going to help us understand people better, but it's never going to answer everything. So we just need to hedge our bets in the different data investments we make. And then the last piece is optimal answers are rarely pragmatic. Mathematical models are amazing. They can optimize that perfect point for us to be playing in, but a lot of times it doesn't make sense for an organization. And so there's just a bit of pragmatism and why I think it's so useful to include data practitioners throughout, because it's just as important to understand how an organization operates for us to give recommendations that are going to matter. So I think that those are really harsh realities that we need to accept. It's not to diminish the role of advanced analytics, but I think the role that data should play at bare minimum is art and science, right? I think we need to find that intersection of quantitative rigor, but also not discount seasoned experience and human intuition. It's how do we bridge them together to tell a holistic story? I personally love the mantra of direction and perfection. I think we need to get a sense of when do we have enough data to make a decision and to feel confident it's right, rather than making the perfect decision, at which case we're going to miss a lot of opportunities in real time. And I think lastly, using data to instill confidence and remove guesswork. I'm not saying remove all guesswork. There's still unknowns and uncertainty, but I think there's a desire to boil the ocean and find that one silver bullet, but actually we'd be better off using data to help us make more calculated bets. So all this to say, think of data as a T-shaped marketer. It really is a depth of knowledge and a perspective. But I think, as I said earlier, it's not the objective truth. You have to collaborate with brand strategists and comm strategists and use their depths to really figure out what the right answer is, what that silver bullet should be. But I don't think of data as the silver bullet. And I think what I really find helpful in working with other partners is what is the distinct but complementary role data could play? And I think there are these two scenarios that we often find ourselves in when we work with too much information, when our clients have everything, or other scenarios where it's too little. So in the cases where there's too much, how do we really use data to help us prioritize and hone in on the most fruitful area for us? And in the areas where there's too little, how do we collect it and infer about people and start making educated decisions based on, well, if I'm seeing these three things across data sets, that probably means this thing about my audience. So I should go and do that. And lastly, the third perception, many people think data should underpin everything, that idea that it is the backbone of everything that we do. And I just think that's such a passive role for data. And I think it forces us to not be integrated more properly. I really like to think about data fueling everything that we do. It shouldn't just be data is validating. It should be fueling us and pushing us to get to the next step because we have the confidence to go forward because we found a really sizable opportunity. So let's assume this is the process. You define the business and brand problem. You craft the strategic response. you ideate the creative solution, you deploy across channels and markets, and then you finally execute and optimize. Data should be addressing different questions at different points of the process so that we're not thinking about effectiveness at the end, we're thinking about it throughout. So these are just examples, but are we prioritizing the right people? Are we building upon our strengths? What are our strengths? How do different ideas tackle our objectives? You know, do they have different super strengths that we should be leaning into? And so I think when understanding the process within your organization and then finding meaningful ways that data can propel us forward rather than just be a gatekeeper, yes or no, should we go, should we stop? And I think that's the importance of having a broad data toolbox because it should be helping us answer different questions at different points. If you only have one tool that's only designed for one part of the process, you're limiting the ability for data to play a bigger role within your organization. And so I remember the first thing that I did when I joined Anomaly is I just mapped out our current toolkit and said, well, look at all the amazing insight we're getting across the 4Cs and how can we start leveraging these tools to be triangulating the truth. And I think it's a helpful exercise to just do internally to say, you might be missing critical tools in your toolbox and it could help you focus on areas where you might want to fill some gaps or where you have a lot of overlap. And if done really well, data should be helping us transform from a baton pass from step to step from a linear process into a more fluid feedback loop so that by the time we've executed and optimized, we're now help defining and answering the next business and brand problem. And so really not just playing that passive role of underpinning a process, but actually transforming it to be a feedback loop and creating a learning culture. So I've waxed a lot of poetic. That's really great in theory. What does it actually look like in practice? I think we already think about data at the end of the process, I think most of us, and that's sort of the inspiration of this. It's an afterthought too often. And so what I wanted to focus on today is really thinking about the ways that we could introduce data earlier in the process. And so simply, I just picked case studies at each of these stages that I'll talk through. It's all blinded, so you won't know what brand, but I'm happy to chat through more in the Q&A for any examples. But I think early on in the process, I love to ask myself, are we prioritizing the right people? Every client brief comes with an audience, and there's a lot of work that goes into that client side, but I think it's also important for us to scrutinize that and really double check, are we actually going for the best people who are going to help us achieve our objective? So this is working with a client where they had a demographic audience, and it made sense for their organization. It's obviously very addressable in market. But what we did is just look at this audience, the size of the audience, and look at their index for key things that we knew were important in solving the brand and business problem. So is it a premium audience? Is it a more affluent audience? Do they have a higher propensity for the brand? So, are we going for the most qualified group of people? Are they talking about the category online? And what we found is, yeah, they tick the box on a lot of these, but actually they were less likely to have high household income. So while they fit sort of the type of customer we wanted to grow with, the reality was they didn't necessarily have the disposable income to invest with us. So then we looked at sort of different attitudes about that audience, about our current customers, apologies, to understand, are there attitudes that underpin our current customer base that we could broaden and scale wider? So I won't go into the details of this, but we did find an attitudinal value that our customers over-indexed on that reflected a broader group of people out in the marketplace. And so what we then did is just define an attitudinal audience that transcended demographic and geographic borders and proved why this audience is more valuable to both the brand and the business. So the same analysis we did at the upfront, but you'll notice all the indices are higher for this new attitudinal audience. We proved that it was a more sizable opportunity. And yes, it will be harder to address, but we had an answer for how we could approach that as well. And so we didn't just take our client brief and say, we agree this is the right audience. We sort of took that step very early on in the process to actually start a conversation and say, is there a world where we can go after a broader attitudinal audience that could be more valuable? Great. Maybe you haven't involved data that early on. You're at the point where you're crafting the strategic response. That's okay too. So in this case study, I'm going to talk about developing a global brand strategy, but also understanding the nuance of different markets and using that almost to make sure that the positioning we landed on could stretch across the different jobs to be done in different markets. So we were working with a client that distinguished markets solely based on awareness levels. So they had their starter markets and then they had their more established markets. And in working with the brand strategy team, what we noticed was missing from this perspective was a key perception we were trying to become known for across all markets. And that really pulled the markets apart in this meaningful way to say it's not just two groups, it's actually three groups of different market clusters. And what we were able to do off of that is, yes, there are your starter markets. They don't know you and they don't know you in any particular way. So it's really important to become famous there. But when it comes to those more established markets, there are actually two types. There are the ones that know you and they know you in the right way. So it's about deepening that engagement and getting more value out of that big awareness that you have. But then there are some markets where you're known, but not for the right reasons. And actually, there's a new job to be done there, and that's really growing the right perception. And so this became a really helpful complementary to all the strategic work that was already being done because it sort of it reinforced that we need to drive perception in most of our markets, but the way we need to do that might be different in a starter market where we need to drive fame versus a grow perception market. And so again, it's playing a complementary role rather than trying to validate a strategist's work and building that confidence earlier on in the process that we're landing in the right area. All right. At that third stop, you're getting to creative ideas. It's starting to feel more tangible. You have an idea of what this, what your communications, your actions, your campaign might look like. Early stages, it's not tactics yet. So here, it's never too early to start sizing the potential of an idea. And you might not want to invest in custom research, but you want to use the signals that you have available to start sizing that opportunity. So what we did here very early on with a client is we had three exciting territories, and each of them were underpinned by distinct consumer values. We proved that those values were true for our customers versus our competitors' customers. So this was really to instill confidence that each territory already had audience insight and sizability baked into it, one that over-indexed amongst our current base. What we then did is measure, okay, of all people who share the values associated with each territory, is there a high penetration of our brand? Do they over-index with frequent shoppers? And actually, are those values that are shared with people who don't shop with us? So actually, it's going to help us attract net new prospects. And what that helped us do very early on in the process is say, all of these territories have strengths about them. And it just helped us understand why they could be powerful for our client. And so a simple color coding system, obviously not showing numbers here, but territory one has something about it that really resonates with our frequent shoppers. So if we give that feedback back to the creative team, are there tactics they can think about that really bring that to life? Versus territory three is really about our base. So is there a way we can think of tactics that can broaden that or help us further scale it out or re-engage our current customers? So again, not using data to say red light, green light, but actually using data to say there's something really powerful here. What does it make you think? And how can we take the idea one step further? Okay, now we've locked in on a territory, and now we're trying to figure out what are the best channels and markets to deploy this in. Something that comes up a lot is talent. We were in a position where we were evaluating 11 different celebrities to partner with for the launch of a new product. And these were all driven based on qualitative criteria. So there was rhyme and reason for why we were even considering them. All we did was build a system with our different tools, but every agency talks about reach. Our clients see it. We're constantly comparing reach numbers, but there's so much more that talent and celebrities give to a brand. They can have buzz, right? It's the quality and quantity of social conversation. So is the not just are they effectively driving the right sentiment? Are they driving the right type of conversation? And then this was in the fashion space. So we wanted a celebrity that already existed in the fashion space and was appearing in the right publications and had the right credentials to push our brand forward. So what we looked at there was social listening of how often was that celebrity mentioned in the right places. And basically what it helped us do, we gave each celebrity a score based on how they performed relative to each other. This is just an example of the performance for fashion creds. Each score gave us some really helpful feedback to how we should approach negotiations with that celebrity if we decided to go forward with them, as well as helping us prioritize the best ones. So then we created a system based on how they performed on those three key criteria. If a celebrity passed all three, great. They're tier one, they're signature talent. We should go deeper with that celebrity. We should really invest the time and resource to make that partnership work as hard as possible for us. If they only pass one or two criteria, we call these calculated bets. And so we just want to hedge and not over-invest in that partnership. It's not the best. There's room for improvement. And so we shouldn't be throwing money and time to make it happen. And then lastly, if they didn't pass, it might still be the right qualitative fit. So we don't want to throw them out, but those are really small bets. We should really continue to monitor, keep conversations going, foster the relationship with them organically if we want, but we don't want to overinvest in them prematurely because they don't have that built-in potential that we size with the others. And so again, I really hate red light, green light. I think data should be helping us inform how we should be proceeding forward, and it should always be driving us forward in the process. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about execution and optimization as much, so there will be one little case study here, but we get the question a lot about optimizing channel mix from campaign to campaign. And so, most brands look at within a campaign report, CPM and investment levels. A lot will look at, in their mid and lower funnel campaigns, their ROAS, their cost per completion or acquisition. And what we did is in both two separate reports, we realized the power of paid social and specifically social video in both the upper funnel and mid to lower funnel. And we also knew that that was true in desk research and existing effectiveness research that shows the value of paid social and online video in driving both short and long-term effects. So rather than trapping that insight in three separate reports, we brought it together to the client to say, there is this great value in paid social and online video, both in the industry overall, but we've proven it in two different types of campaign for you. You need to change your allocation and investment in paid social and OLV for the next year. This wasn't asked of us, but because we were already embedded in that execution and optimization, because we're constantly monitoring what drives effectiveness in the industry, connecting the dots there allowed us to elevate the conversation from a campaign and actually talk about channel mix on a more macro level. That was a lot, and I tend to talk pretty quickly because I'm from New York, but what's the TLDR out of this session? I think if you take anything away from today's presentation, it really should be these 5 things. One, it's better to introduce data earlier in the process. And I think hopefully, as I just introduced in that last section, it's never too late. And if it's not at the very earliest stage, just find the next stage that makes sense, but don't wait until the very end. That you're really minimizing the role that data can play in driving effectiveness for your work. The next one is don't boil the ocean. I think a lot of people ask for what is the insight? What is the perfect answer? And I think instead, work with the teams. There's so many smart people that work within our organizations that we get the opportunity to work with. Build hypotheses and use data to really just assess the veracity of it. A personal favorite, if you can't explain it simply or in human terms, then it's not optimal. I don't care what the numbers say. If it's too complex and it can't drive a better understanding, it's not an optimal answer. So really translate your data sets early on in the process, simplify what it's telling us about people, and make sure that your answer at the end also simply tells us what we're saying about people. Make use of what you have and don't be afraid to ask for immunity. A lot of people say, well, I don't have that perfect data point that I want to validate my strategy, or I don't have the perfect model in place to tell me this is going to drive results. And what I say to that is use what you have to its full potential. And if it's still not enough, then go invest in another data source or in a model, but don't use it as an excuse to not start integrating data throughout the process. So really just we talked about those free sources. Take the time to really think about what do we have access to, and is it telling us enough to make a decision? And lastly, there's no silver bullet, but some decisions are better than others. And data, whether it's helping us prioritize the data set to focus on or infer the more interesting and exciting spaces to play in, really can help us choose between decisions on what's going to be better. I don't believe in a perfect silver bullet, but there are better decisions that could be made throughout. So, and data could play a really valuable role in helping us make those. So that's my spiel. There's my contact information if you ever want to chat more. But with that, that's all I have to share today.